Over the past few months, we've been talking about the biblical theme of the people of God. In the Old Testament, the people of God is an ethnic group, the people of Israel, and that's the normal expectation of how ancient people understood a people or an ethnicity or a nation. There would be a god or goddess that went with a people. And in the Bible, in the Old Testament, the ethnic group Israel, the nation of Israel, was connected with the God Yahweh. In the New Testament, we discover that this people has been transformed into a multi-ethnic ethnicity, a multi-familial family, a multinational nation. The people of God are made up of people from all different times, all different ethnic backgrounds, all different places around the world, all different backgrounds. We've been looking at 1 Peter 2, which really emphasizes that, and it's also really a big idea throughout the whole New Testament. A few other passages like Ephesians 2 really draw that out as well. This week, we're going to look back at the Old Testament and see how this surprise in the New Testament is actually prophesied throughout the whole Old Testament. The way that God acts through Jesus and his new multi-ethnic family is shocking, but it's exactly what he said he was going to do all along. When we talk about the Old Testament people of God, and we're talking about the nation of Israel, sometimes we get a little confused about what God said or what God meant. And that's not surprising that we would be confused because the people at the time of Jesus were equally confused and surprised by what took place. But we need to look at the seeds that were planted through the Old Testament that showed the way forward for the people of God, that it would become a multi-ethnic people. Now, the people of Israel were a chosen family, a chosen nation, a chosen people. And that, to us, modern Americans reading it, and in fact, to many of the people of Israel, can come across as a commission of superiority. The people of Israel were better than everyone. We read this a little differently because we come from a powerful country. People who lived in Israel were coming from a small, technologically disadvantaged country that was often surrounded by powerful nations. There was Egypt in the south, and then Assyria and Babylon were in the north, or the Hittites were in the north. There were great empires of world history surrounding the people of Israel, and they were just a small, in-the-way nation that lived in the hills when the Israelites and the Philistines were battling, like in the classic story of David and Goliath. It's not just that Goliath was physically larger than David. The Philistines were technologically advanced compared to the Israelites. In Israel, there was one set of armor, and the Philistines had all these great new inventions. So as Americans, when we read these stories, when we read the Old Testament, we often read our technological superiority and military power into the story of Israel, when in fact, our cultural and technological similarity is closer to the empires, to Egypt and Assyria and Babylon or the Philistines. And the Israelites are closer to a small country that doesn't have as much power. So when we're coming to these ideas of the chosenness of Israel, we need to keep that in mind. They're a small country that is ravaged by war because they're at the crossroads of the empires. When the empires are going to attack each other or take over each other's land, they take over Israel because it's in the way. And sometimes they just try to go past and they make a mess of things. Israel is constantly under threat, and they're in a place where they are threatened not only by the other nations, but just the normal things that we're all threatened by natural disasters. So we're going to look at Psalm 46 and Psalm 47 today and see what these passages tell us about the nations, about the peoples, both Israel and the nations and peoples around them. To remind us of our Hebrew words that we've been tracking when we're in the Old Testament, one of the words that's used to talk about this topic is the Hebrew word goy, which is mostly translated as nation, can also be translated as families, peoples, or ethnicities. And the other word that we've really been tracking is the word which usually is translated as people, but sometimes can be translated as nations or families or ethnicities. So let's check out Psalm 46 and see what the sons of Korah have to say about God. Psalm 46, for the director of music of the sons of Korah, according to Alamoth, a song. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way, and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging. There could be natural disasters All peoples, all ethnic groups, and all time periods experience that. Now, the sea in the Bible represents the chaotic state of the earth before God brought it into order. Back in Genesis 1, God created the heavens and the earth, and then the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. He was there above the chaos. Then on day 2, God separates water from water to organize water above, meaning like they believed there was water above the sky, and the water below. And then on day 3, God separates the water from the dry land. So he's bringing order out of chaos. This is talking about a reversal of creation, that even if a natural disaster happens, which is a return to chaos, where the waters come back, God is in control. God is our refuge in the midst of the chaos that happens in our world, in the natural world, in the spiritual world. Verse 4, there is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. Most High is the title of God, Elyon. It says in verse 4, there is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. Now, the city of God is Jerusalem, the city of Yahweh, the city of Elyon, is Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is built on a hill, Mount Zion. When you read the Old Testament, you discover that there are these poetic connections between the mountain of God, where Jerusalem is built, which is Zion, and the water of life that's found all the way back in the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden, it portrays the garden being on top of a mountain because it talks about 4 great rivers flowing out of the garden. So in other words, everything goes downhill from the garden. So Zion, which is a real geographical place, it's where Jerusalem is, it's a hill, is equated with the place where life originates, the place where the waters of life come from. So here in Psalm 46, verse 4, there is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. There is a life that comes out of Jerusalem. This is the source of life. This is where the true God, the one God, lives. God is within her. She will not fall. So Jerusalem, which is built on Mount Zion, is contrasted with all the other mountains of the world. Back in verse 2, it talked about how the mountains fall into the heart of the sea. But Mount Zion, where God dwells, will not fall. It will stand. God will help her at break of day. Remember, Israel is surrounded by the great powers of its time, by Egypt and Assyria and Babylon, by the Hittites, by the Philistines. They're surrounded, and they're in this place, this corridor where all of the nations ride their chariots, or take their horses, their armies back and forth into battle. They're surrounded. God is within her. She will not fall. God will help her at break of day. The people of Israel often throughout their histories turned to military and political alliances in order to be saved from their enemies. And throughout the whole Bible, throughout the Psalms and the prophets, God instructs them, don't trust in horses and chariots. Don't go to Egypt for help. It will be your ruin. Don't look to politics and military power for your salvation. Look to me. And in this psalm, we see that the people are looking to God for their salvation. God is within her. She will not fall. God will help her at break of day. Don't just make normal human alliances. Trust in God. And it says, nations are in uproar. Kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice. The earth melts. The word for nations is the word goy, this common word that can also mean ethnicities, peoples, or families. Nations are in uproar. Throughout the world, all people groups deal with struggle, deal with chaos. We're at a time where our nation seems like it's in uproar here in the U.S. There are always times when nations are in uproar, and all nations are always in uproar to a degree. They're not at perfect rest. Nations are in uproar. Kingdoms fall. No kingdoms last forever. God lifts his voice. The earth melts. So the nations around Israel could be in uproar, whether just on their own or against Israel. But God is able to defeat those nations as they threaten Israel, and his power far surpasses all the power of their armies and the beauty of their cities. The people of God, Israel, are told to trust in God, not in these nations. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. The Lord Almighty is Yahweh of hosts, or Yahweh of armies. He means he's got angelic armies. He's got supernatural warriors who are alongside of him who will fight for Israel. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. It's not the nations who are our fortress. It's not our political and military alliances that will save us. It is simply the God of Jacob. Come and see what Yahweh has done, the desolations he has brought on the earth. This is partly talking about the natural disasters, which are mentioned in the first 3 verses. Yahweh is greater than all the nations, all of the kings and the gods and goddesses of the nations. He is able to use or even send these natural disasters to rescue his people and to show that he is more powerful than the strongest human military could ever be. But he doesn't just use this for making war. In fact, in verse 9, it says he makes wars cease. God's goal is to end war. He wants to bring shalom. He wants to bring peace. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. We, in our country, have a different understanding of war. Many of us do, because we haven't had a war on American soil in generations. And most of us have not been in the military, and even many people who have been in the military haven't been in an armed conflict. But for people who live in war-torn areas or who have experienced war in their home, they are heartbroken by war. And Israel is a nation surrounded by warfare and with warfare in its own land. So they looked forward to the day when God would end war. They hoped, they longed for the day when God would end war. They were a weak nation that could be occupied and taken over. So their great hope was that Yahweh would end warfare altogether. Verse 10, he says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted in the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." In Hebrew poetry, there's this parallelism between 2 ideas that go together. I will be exalted, or my name will be lifted up in the nations, in the Goy. These various people groups throughout the world, these various ethnic groups throughout the world, all of them will one day lift up Yahweh. They will recognize that he is the true, ultimate, supreme spiritual being. He's the true God who is worthy of worship, greater than whatever gods and goddesses, whatever spiritual powers they worship. I will be exalted in the earth. All of the peoples of all the lands will worship Yahweh. Yahweh Almighty, Yahweh of hosts, Yahweh of armies, is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Our hope, as we feel threatened, as there's chaos going on around us, is not in our political or military strategies or alliances. Our hope is in the goodness, the greatness of God, that Yahweh is enthroned above the chaos. He's above all that's going on in our world that's wrong, and he's our hope. That is a message for the people of Israel, and it applies to us as well. We may not be turning to military treaties or political alliances as leaders, but we often put our hope in weapons, or we put our hope in political strategies. And instead, we are called to put our hope in Yahweh, the God who is above the chaos, who can even bend chaos to bring goodness. And we see in the next chapter, in Psalm 47, that this isn't a message of superiority for Israel, that they're the best and all the other ethnic groups are to be left out. The very next psalm includes this future look at what will happen when all the nations are brought into the people of God. It's not just that God wants to rescue one ethnic group, one people, and put down the rest of the ethnic groups. God wants to incorporate all ethnic groups into his people. When the Psalms were compiled, the editors put the Psalms in an order for a purpose. Now, these Psalms, Psalm 46 and Psalm 47, are both of the sons of Korah. These were worship leaders in the temple. And these Psalms are put next to each other partly because they share a common author, but also because their ideas go together. Psalm 47, for the director of music, of the sons of Korah, a psalm. Clap your hands, all you nations. Shout to God with cries of joy. Now, the word there that's used for nations is actually the word which is usually translated as peoples. So clap your hands, all you peoples. Shout to God with cries of joy. All you ethnic groups, all you families that have gotten so big you don't know all your relatives. Clap your hands, all of you, not just Israel, not just the neighbors, but all ethnic groups. Clap your hands, shout to God with cries of joy. So in chapter 46, God says, I will be exalted among the nations. I will be seen as the victorious, conquering king. And in chapter 47, it's welcome everyone to this praise gathering. You're not just subjugated under the king, but you're welcomed to praise him, to find his victory is for you as well. Clap your hands, all you peoples. Shout to God with cries of joy. For the Lord Most High is awesome or to be feared. This title is Yahweh Elyon, both of these titles that we saw in chapter 46. For Yahweh Elyon is awesome. He is to be feared. We don't need to be afraid of the mountains falling into the heart of the sea, natural disasters. We don't need to be afraid of political and military threats that are around us. The one that we ought to fear is Yahweh because he is so great. All nations ought to turn to Yahweh as the one who is far more terrible, far more terrifying than anything that we could imagine, whether it's in the natural world or in the socio-political world. For the Lord Most High is awesome, the great king over all the earth or over all the land. Yahweh is not just the king for Israel, he is the king for everyone. This is an interesting thing to say because most people in the ancient world would say, okay, my people has its God, and this people has its God, and that people has its God, and we're fine as long as we treat each other well, we can interact, and I'll worship my God, you worship your God. The unique claim of the people of Israel is that Yahweh is not just a God for them or for this land. He's a God for all people in all lands. And we're so familiar with that idea, we don't understand how surprising this was as a claim in the ancient world. Yahweh is the supreme God who is the God for everyone, everywhere, and that's shocking. He subdued nations or peoples, that's the word He subdued peoples under us. So here we have this idea that the people of Israel are over everyone else. They've subdued everyone else. And we have to be very careful as Americans when we read this because we are coming from a powerful nation with a military and with technology. Israel doesn't have that kind of technology. In the Bible, Israel's told to not have a standing military back in the law. So they're a weak nation. So the idea that they could subdue the nations, they're going to come to that very differently than we do. So we need to think about that cautiously and carefully. Yahweh subdued the nations under us. It wasn't our military might or our technological advancement or how great we are. Yahweh did it. Peoples, this is a different word that's less common, peoples under our feet. So Yahweh has taken all the different ethnic groups who surround Israel and are out to get them, all the different nations, and put them under Israel. He chose our inheritance for us, the pride of Jacob, whom he loved. So the people of Israel are a chosen nation. They are uniquely chosen among the nations, not because they're so good or great, but because Yahweh chose them. God has ascended amid shouts of joy. And this is just something cool I wanted to share. The word for God is Elohim or Hello, and the word ascended is Allah. Actually, the Arabic word Allah is related to the Hebrew word Elohim. So this says Elohim Allah amid shouts of joy. God has gone up amid shouts of joy. He is becoming king over the whole earth. He'll be lifted up. He'll be exalted as king over the whole earth. God has ascended amid shouts of joy. Yahweh amid the sounding of trumpets. Sing praises to God. Sing praises to our King. Sing praises. For God is the King of all the earth. Sing to him a psalm of praise. So this passage is looking forward to the day when Israel has subdued all the nations, but the nations are in joy because of this. They're not feeling the way that you normally feel when you get conquered by another army. So this is a different kind of subjugation than what we would expect. The victory of Israel is not like the victory of an empire taking over other lands. So here in Psalm 47, we see that one day all of the nations will be included in the people of God, and God himself will do it through some kind of unconventional victory where he is lifted up or exalted that causes people from all nations to praise him, to shout for joy. When Jesus died on the cross, especially in the book of John, he said he would be high and lifted up. And he's pointing to the idea that his lifting up on the cross is his enthronement as king. It is the death of Jesus on the cross in the city of Jerusalem on Mount Zion, where he is lifted up as king, where God ascends. And now people from every nation, every people group, every ethnicity have the opportunity to come into God's new multi-ethnic ethnicity, his new multi-familial family, his new multinational nation. And we can be part of that people, and we can shout with cries of joy. In verse 8, God reigns over the nations. That's the word goy. God is seated on his holy throne. The nobles or princes of the nations assemble as the people of the God of Abraham. Now, here the word Am is used twice, so I'll read it again. The nobles or princes of the peoples, the Am, assemble as the people, the Am, of the God of Abraham. What this is saying is that people from every ethnic group will now be included in the people of God. This, as New Testament people who know the end of the story, we expect this. But the surprising thing is that here in this psalm, which talks about Israel subduing the nations, at the end of it, it talks about how the leaders of those nations are now part of the people of God. So this subjugation of the nations, again, looks very different. It's an inclusive subjugation where these people are included with leadership titles, the princes or nobles, into the people of God. They're welcomed in. They're not just simply conquered and subdued, put down. The nobles or princes of the peoples assemble as the people of God, the God of Abraham. For the kings of the earth belong to God. He is greatly exalted. This can also say, for the shields of the earth belong to God. He is greatly exalted. So this could be saying that all of the military power in the world belongs to God, the shields, or it could be saying all of the kings of the earth belong to God, all the leaders of the earth belong to God. He is greatly exalted. In any case, what this is saying is that Yahweh, God, Elyon, the Most High, he is far greater than any military or political threat that his people, Israel, were threatened by at the time. When we look at these two Psalms together, Psalm 46 and Psalm 47, what we see is that no matter what Israel was threatened with, they weren't to put their hope in other nations. They were to put their hope in their God, Yahweh. And eventually, he will rescue them by incorporating people from every nation into his people. And their victory over their enemies, over their neighbors, will be different from what you would expect. It won't simply be a military victory of defeating them and destroying them and then enslaving them or subduing them in a normal way, but would involve incorporating these people into the people of God. So these Psalms lay out the story that we find in the New Testament. Jesus becomes king of the nations through his sacrificial death, not by raising up a great army and destroying everyone and subduing them that way, but instead by giving his own life at the hands of an army, at the hands of the military and political system. He dies and he gives his own life, and he welcomes everyone from every ethnic group, from every people, from every nation into his family. And so we're welcomed to join in with the people of God and cry out in joy. Clap your hands, all you peoples. Shout to God with cries of joy. For Yahweh Elyon, Yahweh the Most High, is awesome, the great King over all the earth. And it's to that King that we give our allegiance, King Jesus, the one who is King over all the earth.